Welcome to Chiefs SportsBeat KC. This is the program on YouTube and the podcast where we talk about the Kansas City Chiefs with folks from the Kansas City Star. And today we've got columnist Sam McDowell and beat writer Jesse Newell. I'm Blair Kirchhoff. We don't have Vi Gregorian with us this week. We'll get him back next week. So, guys, let's talk about the curious case of the Kansas City Chiefs. This team is 11-1. It is in best record in the NFL. What kind of riding a two-game winning streak here, 5 to go, and yet on the last two games against teams with a total of 5 victories, they needed to win on the last snap of the game, won a game-winning field goal at Carolina, and the other botched snap against the Raiders, who were in field goal range and could have overtaken the Chiefs, who ended up winning by 2. This is a team that looks good in record, but has a lot of problems right now. Where should we begin talking about the issues on this team? I suppose left tackle's as good as any, but just before we get into the drill down on the issues, how about the overall feeling or sense of this team, which is still the best record in the NFL, still would be get a first round bye in the playoffs, have home field advantage for the AFC playoffs. It just doesn't feel like the best team in the NFL, does it?
No, but I mean, the Chiefs weren't the best team in the NFL last year either. They are a very good football team. They are probably the fifth, I would say, maybe best team in football. I think the way I phrased it in my column is a very good football team being judged, or with the record of a very great football team being judged on the best of the best teams in the league, because they're a team that is basically Super Bowl or bust. And I actually thought about this. I think they're the only team in the league that you could say, if they don't win a Super Bowl this year, it's a failure, other than maybe the 49ers. And it looks like the 49ers are already in the category of they're not going to win a Super Bowl this year. The Chiefs' hopes are obviously very much still alive. They still have the driver's seat. They control their own fate for the number 1 seed and the lone bye in the AFC, which would be a major advantage that they didn't have a year ago. But yeah, I mean, when you look at just the quality of how they're playing, I think what stands out most to me is the lack of an elite trait right now. They didn't, I think Jesse and I have really talked a lot about the fact that they've been an elite running team for most of the year. That disappeared against the Raiders. They had a 12% success rate running the football against the Raiders. And so that was the one thing that this offense has really hung its hat on throughout the year, was running the ball, because the tackles have been an issue, particularly left tackle when you throw the ball. Patrick Mahomes hasn't hit the downfield passes. So I think their passing game has questions, and now their defense has a lot more questions than it has at any point during the season. So I think that's what stands out most to me is, what does this team do better than anybody else in the league? And I'm not sure we come up with an answer for that right now.
Yeah, it's crazy you're saying that, Sam. I was just going through the DVOA numbers, and that was exactly what was coming to my mind when I was going through what I was looking at. Is like, okay, the one thing I thought they were really good at was run blocking and running the football. They get Isaiah Pacheco back, and they were their worst run game of the year. I mean,
Yeah.
all the things that you think over time that they are really good at, you no longer can bank on that. Like, I would have told you before the year that Patrick Mahomes, I mean, other than being an amazing quarterback, but like the one thing he's going to do is he's going to avoid sacks. Like, he always avoids sacks. Like, that's the thing that he does.
Yeah,
It
that's
doesn't matter
another
if
one.
it's
Great
pressure
point.
or not pressure, like he avoids sacks. Back-to-back weeks, the Chiefs have given up 5 sacks, And listen, some of that's not his fault. We know the left tackle situation and how immediately he's getting pressured. Sometimes he has no chance. But like, to your point, Sam, I'm going through these numbers, and like the Chiefs, I mean, I could read them to you from DVOA, which is the all-encompassing numbers, very well respected. The Chiefs are 9th overall. They're in offense. They're 15th in pass, 11th in rush. I mean, the defense now has dropped to 15th overall. So I'm with you. It's kind of weird that you kind of ended up on that same wavelength as me, because I thought same thing. Like, what do the Chiefs? What could you bank on? What can you rely on? Even the Chiefs, if you go to the defensive side of the ball this year, it's been run defense. The Raiders come in with the worst run team in the NFL, and they had some success against the Chiefs. So yeah, this is a team a little bit in an identity crisis right now, because I don't know not only where they're going, I don't really know what they are right now. But to your point, Sam, and I think it's really good to frame this as different kinds of disappointing, right? San Francisco has had a disappointing year. they're out of the playoffs, basically. KU football had a disappointing year. They lost every close game. They don't get a bowl game. The Chiefs are disappointing, and they're 11-1 and in a great spot to figure this thing out over the course of the rest of the season. So we can have levels of disappointment here. I'm still not sure there's a team I would take over the Chiefs right now. If you just look at, even though they're not great right now, the path that you talked about, Sam, that they potentially could have, and the quarterback they have, the coach they have, the road they have, I probably still would lean toward the Chiefs, maybe even over the Lions at this point, but there's definitely a lot of things to fix.
I'd toss the Baltimore Ravens on that list of teams that are disappointing with this. What are they? 5-loss team right now, team that was in the AFC Championship game.
And it's going to cost them a home game probably in the playoffs now. I mean, I realize that a lot of people just look at records and probably think that the Steelers are a better team than the Ravens. The Ravens are a better football team than the Steelers, and that's going to cost them a home game in the playoffs to where their whole route is going to probably be on the road and in the postseason. The Chiefs are still earning the best path possible. When you compare to last year, though, I think the one thing that does need to be considered is the way the Chiefs were playing through Christmas of last year was not the Chiefs the way that they played in the postseason. Like, they did have some things to figure out, and they figured them out. Most notably, their pre-snap operation changed. They really condensed their offense, simplified things for players in their roles to make them realize what their assignments should be on any given play, and they became a much better team. The question that the Chiefs coaches have to be asking themselves now is, what can be replicable to that? What's the correlation to becoming a better football team? Because there's lots of avenues to where they can improve, but last year was coaching adjustments that changed this. I'm not exactly sure. Well, Blair, you think the lights are out on the Chiefs season, it looks like.
Keep the conversation going as I returned to get the lights back on.
But yeah, so Blair's got a light malfunction. But yeah, Jesse, I mean, that's what stands out to me is the coaches did make adjustments last year. I think a lot of this is personnel driven. When you look at the left tackle situation, when you look at the lack of pass rush, when you look at the coverage, for example, at cornerback number 2, to where they're literally benching guys in the first quarter with Najee Johnson, like there are some personnel issues that I think last year were solved by coaching adjustments.
Yeah, and let's be clear about like what Patrick Mahomes did in the postseason last year. It wasn't that they gained a bunch more value. It's that he stopped losing any value. Like we talk about the sack avoidance. He went totally turnover free basically in the postseason. The Chiefs kept kind of that churning offense moving, but then he was just almost perfect. And we have to mention that as well, guys. Like it's kind of like sometimes you get halfway through, I know I keep bringing up college basketball, but you get halfway through a college basketball season and opponents are shooting 40% from 3 on you. And you're like, man, defense sucks. And then like the rest of the year, they shoot 30% from 3 on you. And you're like, oh, the defense is great. Like the Chiefs turnover thing is weird right now. I mean, like they aren't getting any, It would be a big deal if they got one more turnover a game. And we saw it change the game, obviously at the very end against the Raiders, but the Raiders handed them 5 points, but it would change quite a bit if their defense not only could, stop teams a little bit quicker, but could take the ball away maybe once or twice. And that can happen in a small sample. It happened in last year's playoffs. We know with Zay Flowers, like that was a huge play in the Ravens game. So there is some hope here for the Chiefs that some things kind of swing back their direction when it comes to fumble recoveries or getting turnovers, those sorts of things. But to your point, Sam, kind of the bigger picture issues, it will probably take some coaching adjustments and some continual adjustments from here on out, but maybe their personnel will change too. And that's probably where we're at with left tackle.
One of the disappointing things to me about the Chiefs in these previous 2 games against the Panthers and the Raiders, where the Chiefs were in a position to put both of those games away, right? They were up 20-6, right, on Carolina. Carolina gets a field goal, and the Chiefs have the ball, with an 11-point lead. They're up 16-3 on the Raiders, and in the span of 90 seconds, the Raiders, got a couple of touchdowns and went ahead. And that's, to me, alarming stuff, kind of stuff that you didn't see. And it also kind of speaks a little bit to where the defense is right now. We've been able to count on this defense most of the year, and there's some serious slippage going on the defensive side. We'll talk about left tackle here in a bit, but I look at these past 2 games and see what Bryce Young and Aiden O'Connell did to the Chiefs in the second halves of those games. And, I'm concerned going forward. Is it just a matter of the second cornerback? They haven't been getting a pass rush all year, and yet, they still haven't played kind of as poorly as they did in these previous two games.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the safeties as well. I mean, Brian Cook has not had a great season, and Justin Reed's not had a great couple of weeks. And Jesse wrote about this ahead of the Raiders game, which is the amount of explosive plays they're giving up is ridiculous. I mean, they gave up, what was it, like 5 plays that of above 25 yards in that game? Might have been 6 against the Raiders. I mean, that's how you make what, like you said, Blair, 2 possession games suddenly seem like it's tight, or you're even losing the game. Is because I mean, they went at, they first of all, Brock Bowers is a great player. But the Chiefs threw everything at him. I mean, Trent McDuffie was guarding him when he gave up the touchdown. I mean, they tried everything against him, and it's been a minute since I think we've just said what really the game that I recall was, remember when the Chiefs went to Cincinnati and Jamar Chase, and they just did not have an answer for a very specific player with Jamar Chase. This defense ever since has been able to take away what another team does best. They took away Jamar Chase earlier this year. This defense seems to no longer have answers for what another team does at its very best. And that's what's really stood out to me over the past 2 or 3 weeks.
Did a breakdown with Brett Tavo today on the details about the Chiefs' last drive. So we kind of took a deep dive into what went right and then what went wrong and then what went right again. Obviously, they got the fumble recovery at the end, but very interesting. The first 2 plays, the Chiefs defense just plays it almost perfectly, and that's what you want. You tackle a guy in bounds, the clock is running, you're on your way to getting a defensive stop and doing what you want to do. And then the third play, there's a coverage that Brett, who used to be an offensive coordinator, has never seen before from the Chiefs. A linebacker is supposed to be in a coverage area to help out Shamari Connor on Brock Bowers. Well, by the way, Brock Bowers is the Raiders' best player. Not there. And you leave your slot corner out to dry, and it's a huge game, like you talked about, Sam. Later on, the Chiefs go cover 0. They blitz everybody, and Jaden Hicks is misaligned at the snap. He's too far back. You know what I mean? And he should be up, and he can't cover the back out of the backfield. It's a 10-yard gain just because you're in the wrong spot pre-snap, and it's great to disguise things, but you can't disguise them and then get to the right spot. It doesn't do any good for you. So I think I want to go back to what we've talked about as a theme for this season, Sam, is that so much of what the Chiefs did in the offseason was continuity. They brought everyone back from the roster last year. The only guys new in the building on the defensive side of the football were the guys they drafted. They brought back all their defensive linemen. They brought back Mike Pennell and Tershawn Wharton and Derek Nottie and Chris Jones, like all their guys. They brought their guys back. They wanted their guys to know the playbook. And right now they have miscommunications where this continuity is not helping them. And I think it's reliant on some guys like Jaden Hicks is one of those new guys that is being worked in. Athletic, great, physical, but still working on the mental part of this. And then, I do wonder about Shamari Connor too. That was one of those questions in training camp as well, where we talked about, can he be an effective slot corner? Does he have the skill set to be able to do this sort of thing? And right now, I think you're right, Sam. They're searching for answers on that back end, especially after Jalen Watson went out. But some of this is the continuity they hope to have help them during the season. Because of these injuries, it's kind of put that into flux. And so you get the miscommunications, you get the misalignments, and those sorts of things really pop up late in games when the other team is marching down the field against you.
I thought Chris Jones said something interesting after the game on Friday when, I don't know if we were all down there at the time, but he was railing on the fact that the Chiefs, had their bye week at what was it, week 5 or 6 this year. And then they have the stretch of 3 games in 11 days coming up. And, his plea was, he wants to talk to the Players Association about, if a team has a late schedule stretch like the Chiefs aren't the only one like this. The Ravens have it. So the Texans, the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Chiefs have it. Then your bye week needs to come later in the season, week 10, 11, something like that. So it got me to thinking, is this finally a tired Chiefs team? For having played so late in the season the past couple of years, actually, ever since Mahomes has been the starting quarterback, to be honest with you, 4 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. And the number of games that the Chiefs play compared to other teams, number of weeks that they play, they practice earlier because they play the Thursday night game, which is reserved for the Super Bowl champion. I'm wondering if there's some fatigue that the Chiefs are starting to feel that, maybe look, the remember what the Eagles did last year, how they fell apart at the end of the season after being in the Super Bowl, and look at what the 49ers are doing this year. Super Bowl participant not playing well. I know injuries are a big deal and a big part of it, but it's also part of, one of the reasons why the injuries can increase the more you play. So I wonder if there's a coach or a player would never admit it, but I'm wondering if shouldn't be part of the conversation now about the Chiefs.
Well, what about mental fatigue? I mean, I think you go through I thought that the biggest thing the Chiefs were going to fight against this year was complacency because of everything you just mentioned, Blair, because of how deep that they've run over the past several seasons, but specifically last year. Like last year's regular season went terribly, and they still were fine in the end. And I thought that could be the lesson the Chiefs learned from that. What helped them tremendously this year guard against that was they were undefeated. And they were the only undefeated team. And that became a new carrot that this team had not accomplished before. I don't think it's a coincidence we've seen two of the Chiefs' worst performances after the undefeated thing was gone. And now you do fight this complacency thing. And I also don't think it's a coincidence this team performs well at the end of games, particularly the offense. Yes, for all of its struggle early in games, it's still performing really well late in games, particularly the fourth quarter. And I think it's another thing that, Blair, you said no player would admit, being physically tired. Are they bored, in the first three quarters of a game to where it's like, okay, now this matters. Now you got to turn it on. Patrick Mahomes talked a couple times last week about do or die situations bring out the best in them. There's no reason the Chiefs can't have their best in the first quarter, in the second quarter, in the third quarter. It doesn't have to wait until you absolutely need it in the fourth quarter. And look, it was too late in Buffalo when we saw their best drive of the game to open the fourth quarter. But I've wondered, at least to myself, whether or not that's also a factor, not just the physical fatigue of it, but the lesson they learned last year that, hey, you can turn it on in the playoffs because let's face it, that's what they did a year ago.
So interesting saying all these things about an 11-1 team too, because I know how this appears on the outside, but something else that kind of jogged my memory too, Sam. I think the one question we had going into the season about the Chiefs, we thought if this goes wrong, one thing that could go wrong for them is with all the money they've spent on stars and how they've allocated their salary cap room, which again, not a mistake. You want to sign Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, they've been worth their contracts, all those sorts of things. But we wondered about their depth. Like last year, they signed Drew Tranquil when there wasn't a spot for him.
Yes,
They signed Mike Edwards when there wasn't a spot for him. All those guys, when they had injuries, they filled in, they backfilled, and they didn't skip a beat. I'm thinking now, like of all the Chiefs players where they drafted a guy and they sat him a year and then they played the second year, like a Brian Cook. You know what I mean? Like you draft him, you play him behind a guy, and then he's ready the second year. And they've done that a lot historically to like draft a guy a year before you need him. This year, because of the injuries, they had a little bit less depth on their roster. And these guys that you would hope could take a year and get ready have had to play, and then they haven't always performed exactly what you wanted. I mean, I'm thinking immediately.
Well, Jesse, sorry to interrupt because I've got the list of their draft players. Look at last year's draft class. This is a great point. These are the guys that you would hope would fill those roles this year. Felix Anudike-Uzomah has not developed. He was a draft pick last year. Shamari Connor, he played last year. He is one of those guys. B.J. Thompson, we know his situation that happened in the offseason. Keandre Coburn, they cut out of training camp last year, or a couple weeks into the season. Nick Jones did not make the team. And then you look at this year, the only two guys they took defensively were Jaden Hicks, we've already gone over, and Kamal Hadden. That's their defensive draft over the past couple of years. And so they haven't been getting those guys you're talking about that you don't need stars out of the draft all the time. You do need some depth from the draft.
Well, and to my point too, like, Xavier Worthy's coming on lately, but like that's a guy they hope to be a complementary player. And now because of all the receiver injuries, had to really step up. Kingsley Suamataia, they thought he could be a starter right away. Again, ideal world, you take a year. Now they're going to have to take a year. Even Wanye Morris, he's not stepped into that role. So we talk about Jaden Hicks is another perfect example. Like Brian Cook sort of got his redshirt year. Right now they're having to put Jaden Hicks in because their secondary is a little bit depleted. So I guess my point is when you just lose a little bit of depth, it sort of starts to stair step on you a little bit here. And the Chiefs are kind of having to rely on players that maybe in past years they could say, hey, we'll ease you into this. There's no easing for some of these players because right now the Chiefs are requiring that those guys go in because the roster is just not quite as flush as it might have been a couple of years in the past.
I think that's a great point on the 2023 draft and the 24 draft classes. And those followed what was a terrific 2022 draft class, especially on the defensive side.
Yeah.
Well, and part of that's resources because they traded Tyreek. You know what I mean? Like they got a bunch of picks back, they hit on him, and obviously the guys like McDuffie we're going to remember. But part of hitting on it is having the resources, and it's so hard. I know, Sam, you've talked about this before. Like it's hard to hit on left tackle when you're drafting at the end of the first round every single year, and the Chiefs that's the spot they're at right now.
Speaking of left tackle, what are the Chiefs going to do? I mean, we did hear from Andy Reid on Monday, and he probably spent more than half of the 10-minute conversation speaking to the left tackle position. Doesn't sound, he obviously didn't give us a definitive answer. I don't know if we'll have a definitive answer until we see the team warming up Sunday night at Arrowhead against the LA Chargers. But seems like there's three solutions here for left tackle. You can go back to Wanya Morris. You can go back to the way the game finished against the Raiders, and that's have Joe Thuney kicked out to left tackle and Mike Caliendo in at guard. Or you can hope that DJ Humphries is ready to play this week. The former Pro Bowl, Arizona Cardinal Pro Bowl left tackle that the Chiefs signed early last week. I think in the ideal world, the Chiefs would have Humphries ready to go and we'll plug him in there and have him play his 70 plays on Sunday night. I don't know if that's the case, but we'll see. How did the Chiefs find themselves in this situation?
Well, DJ Humphries is the guy. If he feels okay, like he's going to be the guy on Sunday. And that situation, I mean, it's a guy who has not played in, what would it be, 49 weeks, 48 weeks? I think it was New Year's Eve last year,
right?
That he tore his ACL. So we're looking at like 48 weeks from today, so about 49 weeks from Sunday that he is not. And look, it's not like he's practiced a bunch either. Like the Chiefs are not in these physical practices right now in the middle of the season. And so, he really has not seen live bullets in 49 weeks. And all of a sudden, he's the guy because of your lack of options elsewhere. I mean, we're seeing things from left tackle before that I have never seen from left tackle. It's like a contagion where all of a sudden Wanya Morris is now the guy who just is completely whiffing on edge rushers. This edge rusher that he whiffed on with the Raiders was cut out of camp with the Carolina Panthers, a team that was looking for every position in the offseason. But, some of this, Jesse and I both have talked a couple times during this podcast about Mahomes' sack avoidance. When you look at those numbers, and part of this is because the pressure is coming to Patrick Mahomes quicker than it ever has to where he can't avoid sacks. Like there were a few plays, particularly Wanya Morris's last snap of the game Friday against the Raiders, where we saw the outbursts from Patrick Mahomes afterwards, where there's nothing he can do. Like that's how quick the pressure's coming on him. But let me tell you these numbers here. So Patrick Mahomes has never had a pressure to sack ratio, meaning the percentage of pressures that wind up to be sacks, higher than 13% in his career. Every year of his career, he has been one of the best three quarterbacks at avoiding sacks. This year, he's 16th. His pressure to sack ratio is over 20%. Like this is a number Jesse talked about last year's playoffs. He was at 8% last year in the playoffs, 6% the year before. Like he is ridiculous at avoiding sacks. Him and Josh Allen are just elite at doing this. I know a lot of people think, oh, well, it's got to be Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has not been as great at this as Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Like this is an elite trait that the Chiefs are erasing. And some of this is on Patrick Mahomes, but some of it just speaks to how quickly the pressure is on him. Like they are drive killers. And I actually thought when you go back and watch the game against the Raiders, this could have been a very, very productive day, if not what was happening at left tackle.
Well, Sam said it. I mean, it's DJ now. Like there's no other choice. When your quarterback has that sort of reaction on the sideline, you move on. And it speaks to the fact of what Sam's saying. Now it's in the quarterback's head. And it's never been in the quarterback's head before. I mean, all these other years when he's had, let's be frank, like it's funny, I go back to like ESPN's pass block win rate, Sam, and I know there's kind of questions about which is the best mark of how teams block. But like the Chiefs are like number one in that. You know what I mean? Like they have three elite pass blockers. They have a fourth one who is pretty good on the right side in Jawan Taylor. And they have one who just at times just completely loses it. But I mean, that is turning Patrick Mahomes into, as you talked about, somebody who he's never been. And not only that, you go back to the film and look, we got to say, like he had his best game of the season against Carolina. He's missing guys against the Raiders. Like he could have ended that game earlier if he hits Xavier Worthy a couple different times when Xavier Worthy's open or gets on the same page as him. But some of this is footwork. Some of this is not setting your feet. Some of this is not being comfortable. Some of this is trying to look out the corner of your eye because you think the left tackle is going to get beat again on a certain play and you're going to get sacked in 2 seconds. So this is in the quarterback's head, and that means you have to go to DJ Humphries. That's just the bottom line with this. It's going to be tough to teach him all this in 9 days. It's going to be tough to rely on a guy that hasn't played in so long. But right now, the Chiefs need below average left tackle play, and that's not what they're getting. So you got to try something else, and that's why DJ is going to be the guy this week. I would have to assume, unless something goes terribly wrong.
I mean, three of the pressures that Wanya Morris gave up were in less than 2.5 seconds, to where the play is just over before it even starts. One of them was Patrick Mahomes' touchdown to Justin Watson, where he's just like, screw it. Like, I am not taking a sack here. It's third down. Like, I'm tired of this. And then, like I said, we saw his outburst at the end of the game where he basically is saying, this is not operational for an offense anymore. And to Jesse's point, like, they have not had good left tackle play for a really long time here. Donovan Smith, who everyone was clamoring for, was not a good left tackle for the Chiefs last year. He was just a below average left tackle. Same with Orlando Brown for the 2 years he was here. Like those pressure to sack ratios I mentioned, those happen with not great left tackle play. Like this quarterback can thrive with just mediocre to even below mediocre left tackle play. It's not operational with what's going on right now at left tackle.
Yeah, and your old buddy Eric Eager would talk about this, Sam, the weak link system that offensive lines are, which means you have a chain of 5, but you only need one weak link to really throw this thing off kilter. And so the Chiefs have 4 good links here, and they got to fix the 5th. And again, the 5th doesn't even have to be the strongest link. It just has to not be the worst link in the NFL. And for a couple games this year, the Chiefs have had the worst link in the NFL. The whole chain gets broken because of that.
One positive for Mahomes these last couple of games is he didn't throw an interception. And you remember the first pass attempt against the Bills, as he was going down, he flung the ball and turned into a pick and got the Bills game off to a terrible start. And he ended the game with an interception as well, but didn't throw a pick against the Panthers or the Raiders. So it's a good trend to see for Mahomes. Okay. I don't know if there's another team. I didn't look it up, but I don't know if there's another team in the NFL that is going to end the season by playing 4 teams that, if the season ended today, would be in the playoffs, starting on Sunday against the Chargers, also the Texans, Steelers, and Broncos. And the team that wouldn't be in the playoffs, the Cleveland Browns, just had a quarterback throw for 500 yards in a game last night. So I'm not sure there's a team with a more difficult schedule in the final month and plus of the season than the Chiefs. And the way they're playing here the last few weeks, I'm not feeling it for a great finish. They were 11-6 a year ago. They're 11-1 now. I think they're going to be closer to last year's record than a 16-1 mark. You guys with me?
Real quick, I get to Sam, but they're playing perfect for that. They beat every team by 2 points. What are you talking about, Blair? Right?
Look, I mean, they'll be favored in every game they play over the rest of the season. And there are some teams that play. I mean, look, the Lions schedule comes to mind. They have the Packers, Bills, at Bears, at 49ers, and the Vikings. New England's schedule is ridiculous because they have the Bills twice. But what's changed over these last 2 weeks is the Chiefs had one of the easiest schedules left in the NFL. Well, it's because of the 2 teams they just played with the Panthers and Raiders. The Bills had a much harder schedule, but they just played the 49ers, who, by DVOA standards, were still a good team. They had a lot of injuries against the Bills. It was not a great matchup. Brock Purdy hadn't thrown the football until Friday before the game. And so the Bills caught the 49ers at a really good time. But now the Bills' schedule is significantly easier than the Chiefs over these, final several weeks because of what you just mentioned, Blair. I mean, now the Chiefs are playing teams at not exactly the best time to play them. All year, I've thought, for example, that, The Steelers are not a great team. They looked pretty good against the Bengals. The Broncos were a team that you'd much rather play in the first month of the season than the last game of the season. The Cleveland Browns suddenly decided that Deshaun Watson, what we all could see for 2.5 years, was a terrible quarterback. And now they have competent play at quarterback. And so they're catching teams at not the best time to catch them, in which case I actually think this schedule is more difficult than what the analytics will tell you, because a lot of the analytics will say what this team's been all year. And I think they're playing teams that are better than what they've been all year.
Won't the Chiefs be better than they've been all year? I mean, after all that we talked about, all that we said, I mean,
I don't know that they are. I mean,
yeah, that's
do
the
we think
question.
they
I
are?
mean, where do they go from here? And if you can't rely on the things we talked about, if you can't rely on the run game and run blocking, if you can't rely on the sack avoidance from Patrick Mahomes, if you can't rely on run stopping defensively or stopping any team's pass game, especially to tight ends, yeah, it's an interesting question. So, throw the records out. I mean, right now the Chargers are playing about as well as the Chiefs are. That's the bottom line. I mean, that's kind of what you're looking at here. So, as Sam said, the Chiefs are going to be favored in every game the rest of the way out. There's some of these games that potentially look tougher with the record, like the Steelers, than they actually are going to be. But the Chiefs have got to find a way to play better, and obviously that's the big concern for coaches and players, not only to get these games and try to lock up that 1 seed, but also to just get ready for the postseason and try to make a run just like they did a season ago.
All right, great conversation as always from Sam McDowell, Jesse Newell. Thank you guys. Thanks to Randy Mason and Monty Davis for producing this show. We got to get out of here before the lights go out again. We need to do a better job of paying the light bill around here. So until then, thanks for listening, and we'll talk again next week.